Hi everyone. In this video, I'm going to show you how to create monochrome site plans in Rhino 8. I've already covered how to set up the site plan in Rhino, but I'm going to cover it again. So if you've seen it in the video before, then you can just skip over to the second half of this video. So let's just go ahead and get started. So typically when you get your site plan, you're most likely going to have it imported from an OpenStreetMap source or some type of street map source, whether it's a county or a city. And it typically comes in meshes. So I want to convert this mesh to a surface. And the way that I do that is I will first convert it to a sub D. So I'll do 2 sub D, right? And then I'm going to get these options up here. You definitely want to do mesh corners, yes, because I want it to account for the corners of the meshes. I don't want it to round it off when it's a sub D. Same thing with surface corners, yes. You can do mesh creases if you want to, as yes if you want to. It's up to you. Once I do that, I press enter, and you can do delete input if you don't want the mesh anymore, but I recommend keeping it. So I press enter. So now I have a sub D that's over this mesh. If I click here, you see this is one open mesh selected. I can go ahead and hide that. And now here's the sub D, right? So I'm going to keep this, and I'm going to Control C and Control V just to keep a duplicate of it, and I'm just going to hide it. So now I have this topography that's in sub D. But what I want to do to next is I want to convert it to a surface. So I want to do 2 Nurbs, okay? And then I can just accept the defaults, to be honest. And I can press enter. So now it's been converted into a surface. So I don't need the sub D anymore. It says one open sub D selected. I can just hide that. And here is my surface. This is what I want because now I can start splitting things with it, right? So that's step number 1, is just converting your topography into a surface. So after we've turned this into a surface, the next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to split the surface from the buildings. So I'm going to select my buildings layer right here, do select objects. And I'm going to group them, and then I'm going to split this surface, this topographic surface with the building. So I'm going to do split. I'm going to right click on topography, select objects, enter, and my cutting objects are going to be my buildings. I already have it grouped already, so I'll just click buildings, enter. Great. So if I click on here, do you see now, if me zoom in on here, do you see how the topography now goes around the building cuts? That's really important because when I grab the contours, when I make the contours of this, I want the contours to go around the building. So if I go here now, and if I click on this topography, and I do contour, I'm going to contour it. I'm going to go on the highest point here. I'm going to just contour it 1 meter. You can do, every 3 feet, every 5 feet, 10 feet, depending how detailed you want your contours. So I'm going to do every 1 meter, and it's going to go ahead and contour it, and I'll show you in perspective after it's done. So if I see here, so if we kept it as a mesh, the contours would have been much more sharp. And I don't want that. I want this to be very smooth, and it's really helpful for actual, topographic contoured models in real life as well. So here it is, and I'm going to group it, right? And I'm going to move this to the contour layer. And I'm going to actually just turn it off for now because it can take up some memory and I don't need it just yet. But I want it to go around the building. So if you notice, let me just zoom in before I turn it off. You see how the contours go around the buildings? That's what I want. It's stopping around the buildings. So I'm going to turn off contour for now. Now, the next thing that I want to do is I want to separate the roads from the actual topographic surface. I want the roads to be like an actual surface itself. So I'm going to go ahead and just select my road outlines, to select objects. And I'm just going to extrude it both ways. I can just hold shift on my gumball and the little solid dot. Great. And I'm going to type in split. This is the object. I want to split the topography with the actual extrusions that I've made. Just make sure everything's selected. All right, great. Let me just press enter. Okay, so it went ahead and it split everything. So if I go ahead, I don't need this anymore. I'm just delete this. Delete this too. So if I see this model right here, do you see now how everything is a separate surface? So if I click on this, do you see that? All of my roads now are just one complete separate surface, which I want because when I apply it as a layer, I want this to be a different layer, you see? This is what I want. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to move this to the roads layer. I made a layer called road surface, and let me just change the color so it's easy to distinguish. I'll just make it orange or something like that. There you go, like that. And there's some more that are lagging behind like this right here. So make sure you catch everything when you're doing this. But you get I just want you to get the main point. That's what's important. I want you to get the main point. So if I miss something, don't worry so much about it. Move this to road layer. Road surfaces. Okay, great. So now we have three major elements or four major elements. We have our topography, right? We have the roads, we have the buildings, and we have the contours. This is basically everything you need to make any type of site plan. I'll show you the vegetation later, but these are the main elements that you want separated from your site plan, because now you want to distinguish your contours from your actual topography, from your roads, from your buildings. And if you had other elements too, so like let's say you had parks or like bodies of water, you would do the same thing. You would want to split it so that you can give it a different color. Okay? So that's the first part of the video, which is really important, just how to set up the actual 3D site plan. So the next thing we're going to do is work on the display settings on Rhino to generate this monochrome effect. So the first thing we're going to do is type in options, and then we're going to go down to view. Right here, we'll go down to view. And then we're going to click on display modes, and then we're going to make a copy of rendered. Okay, so just do copy and give it a name. I'm going to call it site plan rendered. I already have settings like this, but just call it whatever you want, and then you can click OK. All right, so make sure you click OK, but I already have settings, so I don't need to do it again. So then you're going to go back here, and then you're going to activate your site plan rendered, and then you're going to do options again, and you're going to go back down to view, display modes, and then find your site plan rendered options. And so here I'm going to start showing you how to tick off some options here, okay? So I want my background to be solid color, and I'm giving it a white background, but that doesn't really matter, but you'll see why it's good in the future. I do have my shadow only checked. I definitely have shade objects. Now, for color and material usage, I want to make sure I'm using object color for both the backface and the color and material usage. So this is really important. So use object color. This is the most versatile option, okay? Now I'm going to scroll down. Now, for visibility, I just have surface edges checked. You can have tangent edges checked and tangent seams checked if you want to. These are all optional, but I definitely just don't like to have a lot of edges shown in the site plan. I like it to be differentiation of shades of color. So I just have surface edges, but there's nothing wrong with having tangent edges or tangent seams. These are great for curved surfaces. Again, these are all optional. I definitely have show curves checked because I want to show the contour lines. Clipping planes, if you're doing a section, again, these are all optional, right? But I would have these on if you're going to have annotations and dimensions and stuff like that. All right, let's scroll down. Now, the next one is really, really important. So the next one is your scene lighting. Okay. So for lighting method, I'm selecting scene lighting, all right? And then for ambient color. So now you need to decide what color or monochrome color effect you want to do. Do you want it to be more neutral, more gray, more magenta, more pink, more yellow, more green, more blue, more purple? So you need to decide that, right? And what, because this will determine the overall color overlay of your 3D model. So I did an ambient color of like this like dark lavender, it's like between a lavender and a blue. If I change it to any other color, like for example, if I change it to red, it's going to make everything have like a reddish hue to it. If I make it yellow, everything's have like a yellowish hue to it. And the lighter and darker it is going to determine how light and dark your model is going to be. So right now, like if I push this lightness, let me just show you as an example, right? Like that, 80. I do okay. You see how everything just got lighter? Right? Like, we don't want that though. So let me just go back and change it. I think it was like 60 or so. I don't know. Like that. So that's going to determine the how bright and the color overlay of your model. So this is very important to understand. So I want to think in like bluish lavender hue. So that's why I picked this color. So then we're going to go and on the drop down, right? On the drop down, I'm going to click on objects. So then we're going to start taking off some of these options here. So the first one I'm going to go to is curves, right? Again, I'm doing objects color, objects width, and I'll explain what this means. But when objects width means I'm going to use the layer settings of objects width. That's what I'm going to use, okay? Now, surfaces, this is important to understand for the edges, like what color you want your edges to be. You have an option. You can either select it by the layer, right, which is the objects. If you do use objects color, it'll be basically objects, the layer color, or I can just give it my own edge color. So I want everything to have like this light lavender look to it. So I made everything have this same outline color. You see, of a lavender. Uh, these two don't matter unless you want to show your ISO curves. If you want to do ISO curves, then again, it's up to you if you want to do object color or a single color. I prefer using a single color for all objects because it just makes more sense in terms of making things more graphically consistent. Again, this is only for surface edges, all right? So not your curves. So you see these contour dash lines or these, yeah, the contour dash lines are not objects, or excuse me, they are not a single color. They are objects color because these are on the curves menu. But all surface edges, so anything that's a surface edge, right, is gonna have this color or whatever color you decide it to be. Now for meshes, like for example, I have this tree mesh block here, right? If I go to meshes, I'm again giving it all the same color around, and I'm giving it a width of 1 for all of them. Okay, for meshes, if you're gonna have a mesh, you don't have to have these checked if you don't want it, because sometimes meshes have a lot of lines on them, so you don't want to show all of the mesh wireframes or the manifold edges. So that's a matter of choice. You have to test it out and see how it's going to look. But as of now, the way I have this looking is I have a single color for all of my meshes, and I have just a thickness of 1. Let me just go back to surface so you understand. Width usage, I'm using object width. Again, that's the layer settings. All right. I think Rhino 8 only has this setting. I don't think Rhino 7 has these settings. For meshes, I'm using wireframe thickness. You can't use object width for that. Okay. Now, what's really important, so you don't have to do clip and planes or lights, but for shadows, this is very, very important. Okay. Now, I have my video memory usage, the graininess on high quality, like maximum. And then blurring, I also have on maximum. Everything else can be on low quality. All right. But these need to be on very high quality. So the self-shadowing artifacts and the use need to be on high quality. Because if not, you're going to get these like weird lines on your model. Okay. Let me scroll down. Now, shadow intensity. Right now, I would say that this is quite intense and it's hard to read, but some people might like this aesthetic. If I change the shadow, and I'll show you final expert examples of different shadow intensities and how they look, all right? But if I go here, the shadow color, I want my shadow color to be like this dark blue, okay? If I bring it down, let's say right now it's 100%. I can bring it down to like 50%. I just want you to see the difference, right? So this is 100%. You slide down. That's around 50%. You see how things got much lighter? The shadow got much lighter. So it's a matter of preference. Some people may not like that dark, deep, intense shadow because it's hard to read your drawing. Other people might like that like very stark contrast. It's a matter of preference and legibility of what you're trying to convey in your drawing. So let me go back up to 100 so you see the difference. You see? I mean, maybe a good in between is like 75, but it is a matter of preference and matter of legibility of what you're trying to convey in your drawing. Okay? So once you have that, you can click OK. All right? Now, this is really important. So again, remember for my contour, right? You see that? That's my contour lines. These are just curves. And I remember in my settings, I said curves will use the object's color, which is the layer color, and the object's width, which is over here. So you see, I gave it a width of 0.5. Okay? Same thing with my edge thicknesses of my surfaces. So anything that's a surface, I gave it a thickness, I think of like 0.3. I'm not sure. I got to check here. Yeah, I think 0.5 as well. I think, yeah, 0.5. All right? So that's very important to understand. Now, there's 2 important items that must be covered. One of them is how I generate the color that you see here of the buildings. And the other item is the actual shadows and lighting. So if I go to my render settings here, right? So if you don't find it, you can just right click on these and add them on if you wanted to. But on my render settings, I want to go down here and do final quality. And then I also want to do which is very important. I don't have my ground plane checked, which is okay. You don't need that checked if you're doing a site plan with Topo. Is your lighting. I do not have my skylight checked. I do not have my skylight checked. On my sun settings, I have my sun checked. I'm doing a manual sun, and the intensity is about, you play around the intensity, and the sun angle is about a little bit above 30 degrees. It's around 42 degrees, right? The way you change the angle of this sun is also going to change like the color output of this as well. So I'm doing this where everything's kind of neutral, and this is probably the best place to start is around here is more neutral. And if you want to get like these, I guess, morning shadows, because this is on the southeast side, right? So if I move this, let me move this. You see how the lighting changes, right? And the same thing here. If I move this down, there, you see how that changes as well? So you want to play around with this a little bit, but in general, I like to keep around like 42 degrees in southeast angle if I'm looking at it in the southern portion. But you get a lot of different effects depending how. I don't like how this looks. I like the other method. I like the other lighting method, like that. Okay, now the colors again. If you remember in the settings, I said use object color. Okay, use object color. So that means like the buildings, which is like this lavender layer here, right? I can change it, right? I can make it darker or lighter, right? You see how it becomes like this now, right? So you decide the colors you want, but they're all going to have this type of hue over it because remember the ambient color in our options was like this lavender, this dark lavender. Okay? So and that's all it is. That's why it's really easy to do by object colors. If I want to change my layer color, it'll start to change, all of the buildings that I want instead of going into the materials and stuff like that. When I am looking at this right now, the print display settings are off. So if I type in print display, right, you see it says the state is off. So that means that it's not really giving me like an accurate representation. If I click state on, right, and then if I do color display, there you go. So now it's going to give me a slightly more accurate representation of how this might look when I print this out, whether it's view capture to file or if I'm printing it, regular print. Now, personally, even now when I see this right here, this is not the actual final representation. It's like an accurate representation, but it's not final. So the actual final one is if I do a view capture to file, okay? Over here, I like to increase my scale. And then I'm locking the view aspect ratio to the ratio of my viewport display. So what that means is first I'll select viewport, okay? And then I'll do custom. And then I might bump, and so I lock it. And then I can bump it up to whatever size I want, okay? And then I even bump it up more with the scale factor because I want this to be massive, I want this to be very big. And then you just click OK and you save it as a PNG. I do not save it as a JPEG, I save it as a PNG, okay? So that's one method of exporting the final drawing. The next method is if I do Control P, right? I can do the settings, Rhino PDF. I give it the resolution I like, right? And the size of the sheet that I like. And then display color, not print color, raster output, okay? Now, I can either do match pattern definition or match viewport display. If I do match pattern definition, it's going to match what my layer settings have it as. If I match viewport display, it's going to match how it looks like on the actual display screen, okay? I would say that the color output on the print is a little bit better than view capture to file, but it's just a matter of preference. Everything here, you can, this is optional, but you're not really going to see a background color here, but line width here, again, I'm keeping everything at this at 1, scale factor of 1. That means that it's just always going to be to scale. And again, let me just reiterate, match pattern definition means it's going to match your settings that you have in your layer. Match viewport display means it's going to match how it looks like on this screen. That's the difference. Okay, it's very important to understand that. And you click OK, and then you print, and it'll come out as a PDF. The difference between printing and view capture to file is that printing takes a little bit longer to generate, but it's a little bit higher quality. Whereas view capture to file is quicker to generate, but a little bit less quality, but the difference isn't that much. I personally like to just do view capture to file for the majority of my drawings, except for things that have dimension strings on them. But that's about it. And so I'm going to transition over and I'm going to show you final exports of how these look when the shadows are darker versus when the shadows are a little bit lighter. And you can gauge the difference. So this is with a little bit lighter, right? This is a lighter site plan, right? With a lighter shadow to it. The shadows are lighter on this one. Remember how I moved the shadow intensity and the shadow transparency? This is like 50% shadow transparency. This is an example of when the shadow intensity is a little bit darker. This is like 100% shadow intensity. So you see it's a little hard to read some items, right? It might be a little bit too strong. So you have to really determine the aesthetic style you're going for. Some people like high contrast in like their architectural representational drawings, but it's your choice. Like some people like this ambiguity if you can't tell what's masking and what's light and what's shadow. Again, when you start capturing from different angles, right, the shading will change a bit. I'm just shuffling through these so that your eyes can just register the differences. Again, this one's very dark, you see? Let me just zoom in so you can see. But like there is some very nice contrast that's going on, but I find this a little bit too dark, in my opinion. A little bit too dark. So if I zoom in here, see the 50% shadow is really nice, I would say. I would say the 50% shadow works the best. It's the most soft on the eye and still gives you a nice monochrome effect. But these are actually very helpful also when you're diagramming and making illustrations. I'm actually going to make a separate video, which is also going to be a little bit redundant, which covers the same method, but more so for diagramming and for illustration styles. There's some slight differences that I'm going to cover, but this is great for monochrome site plans, but also great for diagrams and illustrations. So if you found this helpful, please like and subscribe. I really want to help this channel grow. And if you have any questions, just leave it in the comments section below. Thank you.